Yeah. So, Steve, do you have time to talk a little bit about what you're doing with Vital Information right now?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it a little bit. So the new
Yeah,
record. Let's talk. Let's talk a little Vital Information, if we could.
sure.
And the newest record, New Perspective, right, is the most
That's
recent,
right. The newest album, New Perspective. Yes.
which is incredible. Um,
Well, thank you.
yeah, amongst the, it's one of, I like a lot of the Vital, obviously the whole catalog, but this one really stands out. So can you talk about the current trio,
Yeah,
how they came to be?
sure. Actually, I'll bring up another New Jersey musician, Vinnie Valentino.
Know that name? Yeah,
Yeah, guitar player.
yeah.
And he was in Vital Information from 2007
Hmm.
uh, up until 2020. And when our keyboard player who went was Tom Coster for many, many years. And then I had Mark Zoskin in the band. And Mark had some health issues in 2020. Vinny told me about Manuel Valera.
Hmm.
And Manuel's from Cuba, incredible pianist or full keyboard player, like very good with synths and electric keyboards as well. And he lives here in New York and Washington Heights. Um, so he came in uh, to play with Vital Information in 2020 at the early part of the year when I did have some gigs, and it was before the shutdown. And then my bass player, longtime bass player, Baron Brown, he had a stroke in early 2020, which he could know, that really, it was a very severe stroke and he couldn't play at all anymore. In fact, he ended up dying about a year later of brain cancer,
Yes.
which was pretty tragic. He was only 62 years old. Uh, and when he couldn't make these gigs that I had, I remembered playing with Yannick Gwizdala, a
Mhm.
great electric bass player that I had toured with Mike Stern and Randy Brecker. So I called him to see if he could jump in, and so that became the beginning of this new incarnation with Yannick Gwizdala on bass and Manuel Valera on keyboards. And then there was right in March 2020, we had a week in Melbourne, Australia, and
Okay.
Vinny couldn't make it. And we went and played as a trio. That was a revelation that, I can actually do this as a trio.
Yeah.
And it was because Manuel, he could play all the keyboard parts plus the melodies, and it just had a beautiful feeling to it to work as a trio. And then, of course, financially, it's a little bit easier, especially these days, traveling and trying to get around the world. So I said, let's just go forward as a trio. And the guys are super creative and come up with either great compositions or fantastic arrangements
That's
of tunes. And so it's been, kind of a virtuosic push. So, we started in 2023. We worked on what I would call the 40th anniversary album of Vital Information. It's called Time Flies.
Mhm.
And we went into a studio in New Jersey owned by Costa Kamchev. He calls it Mozart Studios.
Okay. Not familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a beautiful studio. It's actually in his home, sort of like not exactly in his home, but attached to his home
Sure.
in a neighborhood. But he's got a full-on incredible studio there. He's got some cameras built in, so when we play, we can record we can film what we're doing. So we went in with the idea of making an album in about 4 days. Uh, and since it was the 40th anniversary album, I wanted to also include playing with some old friends musicians. So we had Mike Maneri play on a
Mhm.
tune. And
Yeah, yeah.
Mike actually lives across the street from me here in New York. So he played on one tune. And then I wanted George Garzone to play on a tune.
Oh, sure, from Boston,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because I had played with George when I was at Berkeley.
Mhm.
Like he had the fringe even then. And there was times where I would sub and play drums in the fringe.
Oh, wow, that's it. So, yeah, so with John was my teacher, John Lockwood was he
Oh, really?
I guess it was
Well,
Rich before that time,
yeah,
right?
at the time I was playing with the Fringe, it was Rich Appleman.
Yeah, yeah, I
But I
remember.
played a lot with John Lockwood as well. Like
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were in the, did you ever hear this recording of the Lynn Viviano Big Band in
Uh,
1974? I'll have to send it to you. It is on YouTube, but I played in this big band in 74 and 75, and it was called the Lynn Viviano Big Band. He was a lead trumpet player from Buddy Rich and
okay.
Maynard. And he had his big band, and almost everyone in the band was an alumni of Buddy and
Mhm.
or Maynard. And
Okay.
first Rich played bass, then John Lockwood played bass. And then the second year of that band's existence, we went to Chicago to make a single for Creative World, which was Stan Kenton's label.
Mm,
And we played and the pianist was Barry Kiner, who went
okay.
on to play with Buddy Rich for a long time. And great saxophone section with the main tenor soloist was Bobby Malik. But Bobby and I were both 19 years old,
Okay.
and Barry Carnan was 18, and John Lockwood was probably not much older, if not, he's probably 19 or 20 himself. So
Right.
there is a couple tunes that we recorded, and I'll find the one that's called L.A. Expressions. It was
Okay.
from a Tom Scott album,
Mhm.
and then they made a big band arrangements. You'd find it interesting to hear John Lockwood playing Fender bass
Oh,
in
sure. Yeah.
1974. But
Well,
yeah,
that whole group was so into the Fringe was so I don't know if they're still doing. They were doing
yeah,
it.
they are. I think they are. Yeah,
Yeah. And Garzone used to. I had a steady gig in Boston, and he would come sit in all the time.
right.
Yeah. What a master. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, it's a good like detour. Yeah, and then I played with this band called Baird Hearsey in the Year of the Year, and George played in that. And then he had a band with a trumpet player named Joe Casano, and it was a wedding band called the Golden Chords. I used to play some gigs with that, if you can imagine. So I wanted him to come down, and then he ended up. We did the tune that I wanted him to play on, which is McCoy Tyner's Inception. So that's on the Time Flies album. And then in his own unique way, he said, "Well, let's keep playing. Let's keep improvising." And
Yeah.
and so then we started improvising tunes and we made in about 2 hours an entire album.
Mm,
And so when the packaging of the Time Flies CD is there's a 1 hour CD here, then you open it up and there's like a 50-minute CD of those
okay.
improvisations with George called A Prayer for the Generations. So we
Oh,
made a whole album
yeah.
with George. And the only tune I think that was actually a tune written beforehand is we started out with One Down, One Up.
Mm,
Coltrane. He
sure.
wanted to play that. He goes, I've been working on it, so let's play that. So, and that's all on a video. Like you can find all those tunes were recorded at the studio, and they're all on YouTube.
All right, I'll have to check that out. Yeah,
Pretty
yeah.
interesting. So we made that album and did a lot of touring around the U.S. and some we did a tour of China and and then we eventually played at Ronnie Scott's and just kept working and so while we were touring and I had a day we had one day off, we went back into the studio in New Jersey and recorded 4 tunes for New Perspective.
Okay.
So at that point, that's when Manuel and Yannick were saying, well, let's play some Journey tunes. And I was saying, like, no.
That's funny.
That idea did come up over the years, but it just never, was never anything I wanted to do. and I, in fact, couldn't imagine playing jazz versions of Journey tunes, even
Yeah.
though a lot of people have done that kind of thing.
Mhm.
You know, like Herbie Hancock did it with Jack DeJohnette playing
Yeah,
drum,
yeah.
new
New Standards
new
albums. Yeah.
standards. Yeah, but so Manuel just nevertheless he came up with an incredible arrangement of "Don't Stop Believing." It's
It's
like
an
we
incredible.
tried it at a sound check and it sounded great. So we started playing that. He did it, made an arrangement of Open Arms, and then Yannick came up with an arrangement of Who's Crying Now, and
Hmm.
it went from there. And then then that kind of turned into this concept. Well, why don't we do some other tunes that I had recorded before with different bands? And both of those players were big fans of the first incarnation or the first steps ahead that I played with. Like started playing, I left Journey in 85, and then by 86, I was playing with Steps Ahead with Michael Brecker and Mike Maneri, Mike Stern, and Daryl Jones. And we, were touring and we played a concert in Tokyo that was filmed. And
Okay.
that turned into a video and an album called Live in Steps Ahead Live in Tokyo 1986. Well, those guys, when they were coming up, they loved that album and listened to that so a lot. So we did one of the tunes from that called Sumo. It was a Michael
Yeah.
Brecker tune.
Hmm.
So Manuel came up with a great arrangement of that. And then we were playing The Perfect Date, and that's a tune that Tom Coster wrote that goes way back to the early 80s and or mid 80s. And then Manuel came up with a radically new treatment of that that put a lot of odd time signatures and took the essentially the same tune but changed
Yeah.
changed it a lot. And so we recorded that. So it kind of turned into this concept record of
Journey.
new perspective on these different tunes that I had played on before.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. But the arrangements are incredible. I mean, especially like you mentioned the ones that the Journey tunes. In fact, I mean, it's like so reharmed.
Yeah.
So, it's did anyone from Journey mention that they heard it? Did they have any
Well, I played them for Steve Perry.
yeah, what did he
Just
think?
he loved Open Arms.
Oh yeah? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And he thought Don't Stop Believing like was okay, but it was but he didn't love it. And then he came to see us. He did come to we played at Catalina's in LA, and he came out to see us play and hang out, and we had a great time. In fact, another tune that we played uh, from my Steps Ahead years is Self Portrait.
Yeah.
And Steve Perry thought that was like an incredible composition. He was really blown away by that. So, yeah. And of
Yeah.
course, and then we played earlier this year. We played in Oakland, California, at Yoshi's, and Ross Valerie, the
Hmm.
bass player, came out and heard us, and he
Oh,
loved everything and hung out. He's a very,
yeah.
very nice person and great, supportive musician. Uh, so yeah,
Yeah, cool. And then like on some of the tracks, I'm assuming it's I guess the best terminology you've obviously studied this more than me. The Indian classical music influences, right?
yes.
Yeah. I have two funny stories about that, but about my connection with that. But can you talk about how that played into your sort of development? How did you get into it, and who did you study with for that? Because it's a
Sure. How I got into it was in 2001. I was hired to do a tour with a tabla player that had organized a pretty amazing band, and the tabla player was named Sandeep Burman, and not a well-known tabla player,
Mhm.
but he lived in Chicago at the time, and he knew Howard Levy and Jerry Goodman,
Okay. Yeah.
and so he had tunes that he had in his head, like tunes that he wanted to have written down. So he hired Howard to write them in Western notation because the Indian musicians don't use Western notation.
Right.
In fact, they don't really use notation per se. They take notes but it's not the same as our kind of notation in the Western world. So Howard wrote down these tunes, and and then they were trying to, get a drummer to play the music, and he had Victor Bailey on bass. Uh, who else was in that? It was like some amazing musicians were in that band, and I can't think of everybody. Paul Bolenbeck on
Mm.
guitar, and um, and Randy Brecker on trumpet, and who's the head of NYU music department, alto player? Can't think of
Oh,
his name right now.
not,
Sorry.
not, not Bruce Williams. Yeah, it's escaping me.
Hopefully, but he was in the band. So it was this pretty, amazing group, and they needed a drummer that could play in odd times because the way Howard wrote the music down, like almost every bar was an odd time signature.
Yeah,
There'd be 9/8 and 7/8, 6/8, 5/8,
right.
3, all this stuff. So I had made an album with Jerry Goodman and Howard Levy and O'Teal Burbridge
Oh,
called The Stranger's Hand. That
mhm.
was like a fusion, total fusion on, we played Jerry Goodman tunes and Howard's tunes and improvised a lot. So they knew I could play odd time. So they, had me come to Chicago and rehearse. Then we went out on tour. And I'm, reading this, and then I think I probably recorded it and listened back. And after a while of being on tour, I said, Howard, I think this tune's actually in 4/4.
Right. After,
but
after all those
but it's
changes,
got all these
yeah,
phrases, but it
yeah,
all
right.
comes out in 4/4.
After all that, right?
He was like, yeah, oh yeah, so that was like, wow, this stuff is kind of interesting. It was not all of it was 4/4, but I'd say some of it was in 4/4. And so then the next year, 2002, I was teaching at a drum camp in Germany, and there was a teacher that played a South Indian drum called tavel. It's like
The
a
double.
barrel drum, two heads. You play the right side with these little thimbles on the tips of your fingers and a stick. So it's a
Mhm.
very loud drum. It's unusually loud for an Indian drum. But he was teaching Indian rhythms, South Indian rhythms, using conical to teach the rhythms.
Right.
So it was a 6-day camp. I was teaching there. Chad Wackerman, a bunch of drummers were teaching there. But every night I'd go to his class, and that's where I got introduced to conical
Hmm.
and some of the Indian rhythmic philosophy of like how to structure rhythms. So then it became very clear to me about like why these, why how Howard Levy heard things
Hmm.
as distinct phrases where in fact they're just over a 4/4 pulse, but
Yes.
they're dividing up the pulse and
Mhm.
subdividing it into small, twos and threes, fives, sevens, nines, etc. So I got fascinated with that and started practicing first the rhythms that I learned at the camp, then the conical, and and to make the story a little bit longer, then in 2003, I ended up getting hired by Larry Coryell to play some local gigs in San Francisco because Larry was, kind of guitar player in a lot of ways. He'd fly in to do a festival, but use a local rhythm section.
Okay.
So I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time. So the bass player was Kai Eckhart,
I love him.
who
Yeah.
used to play with Violent Formation. He's on uh, Fia Fiaga Celebration album, and I'd done a lot of touring with Kai. George Brooks was the sax player, and Larry was the guitar player. And I think it was the first time I met George, and so we just were talking and talking. And as it turns out, George is like deep into the Indian
Right.
music, and he said, I'm starting this group called Summit, and it'll be with Kai, Fareed Haq on guitar, Zakir Hussain on tabla. Do you want to play? And it was like, yeah. so that was like that put everything on a fast track for me because then we made an album. It's a very nice, really great album called Summit,
Mm,
George Brooks Summit. And then we did a lot of touring over a couple of years. And going on tour with Zakir is like going to a master class that lasts it's every all pretty much all the time you're together.
yeah, yeah,
He's teaching, and we were all like learning. We all wanted to learn the conical. Not just me, of course, Kai Eckhart and Farid and George were all like reciting syllables and on plane flights and you know, in the wait
yeah.
in the lounge waiting to go on the planes. And then so playing with Summit, playing with Zakir, I really learned a lot. And though most of my knowledge is from South India, Zakir's from North India, yet he knows a lot of the South Indian rhythms as well. So when it
Hmm.
comes to, let's say, the music of George is kind of mixing both North
Right.
and South. And then when you hear Zakir play with Shakti, rhythmically it's based in South Indian rhythms more than North
Right. And
because
North Indian's
because
more North Indian is the more more I don't want to say popular, but am I wrong in thinking that Northern Indian music was more studied like I don't know. For so I always connected with Northern Indian music, but maybe I'm wrong.
well, let's say the
The conical,
most famous North Indian musician would be Ravi Shankar,
sure. Yeah,
who
yeah, yeah.
plays the sitar. So that's a North Indian instrument. They don't really play the sitar in the South.
Okay. That's the
And the sitar's accompanist would be a tabla player. They
right,
don't
right.
really play the tabla in the South.
Okay. That's
It's
the
so
thing.
so and the rhythms tend to be in some ways like rhythmic melodic because of the melodic capability of the tabla.
Hmm.
And so even though I'd say the North was probably originally based on the South Indian rhythms, they did evolve and change because North Indian, they call Hindustani music, also has a Middle Eastern influence.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And because of their proximity to the Middle East, the
Right, right.
Northern Indian, whereas the South in some ways is more retained the purity of the original uh, rhythmic and melodic concepts that evolved, maybe thousands of years
Yeah,
ago.
sure.
And in some ways, for me being a Western drummer, the South Indian concept is a little more funky and a little more easily graspable because it's like kind of evenly subdivided
Hmm.
and grounded in kind of a um, I don't know, more earthy feel
Okay.
from my perspective. So when you and the group Shakti is an amazingly perfect view to see both of these concepts. Is Shakti started with Zakir on tabla, North Indian, Viku Vinayakaram on the Gatam
Yeah,
from
yeah.
South India,
Hmm.
the clay pot.
Yeah.
So the South Indian drummers don't generally learn the North Indian rhythms. So Zakir had to go and learn the South Indian rhythms from Viku Vinayakram.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
Eh,
that was what I was trying to get at. Like there is
Yeah.
does seem to be like this divide between
Yes.
North and I teach a class in global popular music, so we talk about Indian music a little bit. And yeah, it's a fascinating it's fascinating. But so I'm sorry, continue. So
Yeah, and then like after Viku Vinayakram retired from Shakti, his son Selva Ganesh took over.
okay, yes.
And if we go back again, lineage wise, Ravi Shankar's tabla player was Ala Raka,
Hmm.
and that's Zakir's father.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And so then, when Zakir came to prominence, like in a way, he learned from Ala Raka, but then, in my opinion, he went beyond even Ala Raka's incredible virtuosity and knowledge. And one reason is because Zakir lived in the U.S.
Hmm.
and he still had an apartment in Bombay, but he lived in the San Francisco Bay Area,
Right, right.
and was very close with Mickey Hart
Okay.
from the Grateful Dead, which exposed him to rock and roll. And then, like when Mickey Hart did Planet Drum, he ended up touring with Airto and Giovanni Hidalgo and drummers from Africa, and he just was exposed to such a wide range of music, and he was able to really absorb all of that. I think, and he played with jazz musicians like Charles Lloyd, and and so on, that he developed kind of a singular, unique concept that, in a way, incorporated all of the rhythmic schools of the world into one. He's really quite an amazing person and musician. So that's my long story of how I got. And then I decided, okay, now I'm working on this chronicle and I can work it into the music of Vital Information.
Right. And how were the other guys? Because it's such a unique my only experience learning it. You probably know Jamie Haddad. Are you familiar?
Yes, I do.
I
Yeah.
took a frame drum class with him at Berkeley, of all things. And Jamie, for some reason, he didn't like me very much in the first class, and he had me dance and sing in front of the entire class. Oh, Tadiki not doing, Tadiki not doing. I'm sitting up there like feel like a fool, and he's like, "You're not feeling it. You have to dance." So I'm dancing like it's rhythm. Oh man, I was so embarrassed. But I didn't. I always came to this class prepared because I was always scared of him.
That's great.
But additionally, like I remember going to a master class, and you mentioned Kai Eckhart, who was there. It was
Yeah,
Trelock Gertus was doing his thing, and
right.
a student, this poor student, asked, how are you counting that? What time? And Trelock got upset, because to him it wasn't about that. He was like, well, it's just my culture, and I do and he was singing the syllables, and he just eviscerated this kid because he couldn't. We as a Western musician, sometimes it's very unique way of learning and playing. So how did the rest of your bandmates like take to it? Because you clearly studied it pretty intently.
Right. Well, it's when I first introduced it to the group, it didn't start with the chronicle. It started with bringing in the rhythms and then us as a group writing music using the rhythms. So it started with Tom Coster, Baron Brown, and Frank Gambale playing. And I know we wrote a tune together that's on an album called Come On In. And so that it started without me doing, I don't think my chronicle was that great at the time. So I was just coming up with the rhythm. So it started by just introducing the different rhythms and then us using rhythms to write tunes. Because a lot of times we write using like the jam concept. It's
Okay.
kind of the rock and roll jam concept,
Yeah, yeah.
which is the way Journey wrote a lot of music, is the way Santana wrote a lot of music. So Tom Costa was very familiar with that, and I was
Mhm.
familiar with it. And then we introduced it to Frank Gambale and Baron, and and it just or and it works in a way where if I come up with a whole structure of a tune and then they do their thing, come up with melodies, chords, melodies, bass lines. It's an
Cool.
organic way of a band writing music together.
That's cool.
And so, and then I just then we worked on some music where I would do conical, and then there'd be improvising as a rhythm section, and then conical. So you can hear that on an album that's called Vitalization. It's the first album with Vinnie Valentino stepping in on guitar. So we had some music like that, and it just kind of kept evolving over the years until finally it turned into like this 8+5 that you hear on New Perspective. Like I
Yeah,
had written this entire piece and recorded just the drums and the conical by myself, like you can hear in that Sonar
yeah,
video.
yeah, yeah.
And then Vinnie Valentino and Baron Brown came in and wrote melody and harmony to it. So that's essentially how that tune was written. Like I
Wow.
came up with the whole structure,
Okay.
and then we could adjust it. So once it was written, then it became somewhat malleable, and we could arrange it and move things around. But that's how it was written, as a rhythmic structure first, which is not unusual for an Indian concept of writing, because their music is melody and rhythm.
Yeah.
So all the instrumentalists learn the rhythm. It's not just the drummers.
Right.
And when they write music, write melodies, it falls into the rhythmic framework, the rhythmic philosophy.
Yes.
So whether it's north or south, Indians musicians, they follow this kind of pattern, where you can write a whole piece of music based on rhythmic structure and putting notes to those rhythms, and then you improvise.
Okay. Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
improvisation will be on a raga.
Hmm.
And
So,
once that raga is set, it's fixed.
yeah, crazy.
It's not there's not change they're not changing chords, they're not changing ragas.
Hmm.
It is what it is.
Wow. Did you study in India at all?
A little bit. Yes, and I've been, but the bulk of my learning has been in the US or in Europe. And
Hmm.
it's really just as a matter of sitting down with the different musicians that I've met, and just mainly learning on the job of playing a gig.
Yeah.
Here,
Yeah.
learn, and like I did a number of gigs with Viku Vinayakram, who I mentioned as the clay pot, gatam player, and he would teach me rhythms, and okay, learn this, and we're going to play it tonight. And then,
Mm.
or if I, messed it up, we'll play it. We keep playing it night
Right.
after night. And actually, there's a British percussionist named Pete Lockett,
Okay.
who is an expert in both North and South uh, in rhythms, and so he taught me a lot. We've done a lot of gigs together, he and I, as a drum duo. Um, and then, and I have gone to India. I've toured with Vital Information. I toured with Zakir in a group called Masters of Percussion. And then I've gone over just to play some gigs, and gotten together with different drummers over there that have taught me, a lot of rhythms. So the learning the rhythms in some ways is kind of like learning standards here,
Yeah.
because a
Okay.
lot of the rhythms are like universally known,
Hmm.
like you would say a standard is universally known by jazz musicians.
Sure. Oh, yeah, that brings it all, that ties it all in nice,
Yeah,
actually.
because that way, if like jazz musicians don't like to rehearse, and this is a generalization, but but Indian musicians like to rehearse even less than jazz musicians.
Wow.
So there's like a lot of these universally known rhythms,
Hmm.
which makes it like really easy for people to get together and not even rehearse at all, but
Right.
get on stage and play. And then once somebody starts a rhythm, the other guy will, if there's two drummers, or even an instrumentalist, they'll recognize it and be able to finish it, finish the phrases with them.
Right. Right. Yeah, I do remember having to learn like a bunch of standard rhythms.
Yeah.
Uh, and they're still in there somewhere for sure. That's cool. So I know it took up a lot of your time. This has been I've really enjoyed this. But so with Vital, the timeline to me is a little foggy. So did that start, was that pre-journey it kind of started and then picked up, or when did it
Well,
form?
you used the word kind of, which is kind of true. It did kind of start before Journey,
Okay.
but it wasn't called Vital Information. But when I was in high school, in the Boston area, I met. I was in high school, but I was playing in a college big band. It was Bridgewater State College, and they recruited me and a few other high school players to complete their college big band. So the bass player was Tim Landers, who was
Yeah.
also in high school, and David Wilczewski, a sax player from another town, also in high school. So the three of us, Tim Landers on bass, Dave Wilczewski on sax, and myself, we're the beginning of Vital Information. So
Mhm.
we were playing in high school, then we all went to college. Tim and I went to Berkeley. Dave Wilczewski went to the New England Conservatory, but we were still playing together in those years. And then once I started playing with Jean-Luc Ponty, and Tim started playing with Billy Cobham and Al Di Meola, and Dave was out working with Freddie Hubbard, and
Yeah.
we'd get back together in Boston and play. And we had Dean Brown sometimes play with us. We had Daryl Sturmer play with us, different guitar players. So that's the beginning of it. Um, and then and so that's like into the late 70s. So by 83, I'd been in Journey for a couple of years. We'd made a bunch of platinum albums.
Mhm.
So there was a point where uh, myself and Steve Perry and Neil Sean wanted to do our own albums.
Okay.
And so like a, so-called like a solo album, but I was able to get a deal on Columbia in 1983 to
Okay.
make an album. And so that's the first Vital Information album. So it happened in the middle of my Journey experience. So 83, I got Tim Landers, Dave Wilczewski, and we had written the music. We had all these tunes we were playing. So we had all the music written. And then we had Dean Brown on guitar and Mike Stern on guitar.
Right.
Because
Right.
we were all playing with Mike in at that. He was at Berkeley when I was there too.
Nice.
So that's the first album, just called Vital Information. It's, came out. We were spent about 5, 6 days in a studio in Rhode Island,
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
the album, and that was in January. Then I did the Frontiers tour with Journey that year, and then September, October of that year, I did a whole U.S. tour with the first incarnation of Vital Information.
Okay. So,
And,
and then,
and when you see the Jack DeJohnette interview part 3,
okay.
there's a clip of that version of Vital
Oh,
Information
cool.
that,
Nice.
that I found. Like I just came across it. Uh, but Mike wasn't playing with us on tour because he was still playing with Miles.
Mhm.
So I had met a guitarist from Holland named Afe Albers, who is just a monster, like bop and roller.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he played second guitar. So that first band didn't have keyboards. And at
Right.
the end of that tour, we went into the studio with that band to record the second album called Orion. So that was recorded at the end of 83 and it came out in 84. And then, so that's the beginning of the group.
Okay. Cool. So like, so how does Journey come? Like you're jazz, doing more of the jazz thing, and I guess a little fusiony thing. How does Journey come to? How do you come to Journey then?
Um, yeah, I was right out of Berkeley, I got a gig with Jean-Luc Ponty.
Right. Yeah. And that
And
was probably your first big name gig, right? At that.
yeah, like first touring gig and touring around the world, and then first album, making a full album,
Right.
Enigmatic Ocean with that album, and after playing with Ponty for a little over a year, I moved to LA, started doing some auditions, and well, you'll appreciate this story. Is that in the same week I got a gig with Freddie Hubbard and Ronnie Montrose by doing
Okay.
auditions.
That's
And
like two totally different.
totally like a fork in the road because my roommate at the time was the road manager for Jean-Luc Ponty, who
Okay.
also worked with Freddie Hubbard because they had the same manager. Michael Davenport managed Jean-Luc Ponty and he managed Freddie Hubbard. So I did this audition and with Freddie and he wanted me to go on tour with him. And that same week I had gone to San Francisco to play with Ronnie Montrose, who was looking for a drummer to do a tour. And his music was instrumental rock.
Hmm.
Like he had a band called Montrose with Sammy
Yeah.
Hagar,
Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh.
and but then he did an album called Open Fire that was an instrumental rock album. So he was, trying to go like in a Jeff Beck kind of direction, instrumental rock. Wasn't fusion. I wouldn't call it fusion. I'd just call it instrumental rock. But he wanted like a fusion drummer. He wanted a drummer to really like play a lot in the music.
Okay.
So I got that gig. So that was like what do I do here? Which way do I go? Well, after touring with Ponte for a year, I have to say I really loved playing like this big double bass kit, which like when I started with Jean-Luc, I had a little Gretsch jazz drum set.
Okay.
And then, but after like a month of playing with him, he said, can you get a double bass kit like a Billy Cobham kit?" And he wanted that sound and that look.
Of
So
the
that's
double.
when in 1977 I bought my first Sonar kit. I bought a double bass, two 24-inch bass drums, three
Right, right.
rack toms, two floor toms. And then we were playing and we started in clubs. And by after a few months, he was playing 2,000 seat theaters, 3,000 seat theaters and lights and a PA. And it was like this, like kind of big, almost like rock experience
Yeah, yeah.
to play that music in those days. Well, that was super fun. So basically, that influenced me that well, I played a lot of jazz, and if I play with Freddie Hubbard, which will be amazing, but I'll be going back to that little Gretsch kit.
It comes down to the drum kit. Okay.
Yeah, the drum kit, but also the experience, the experience. I had not worked with a professional rock band.
Hmm.
All of the people I played with were like jazz type
Right.
folks.
Okay.
So I thought, well, let me try this. I'll still play the big rock drum set.
Mhm.
It'll be interesting. It's just like following my interests, like and an opportunity came up. So anyway, I decided to tour with Ronnie Montrose, who was managed by Bill Graham and then put on the act with Journey. Journey's first headline tour was 1978 with Steve Perry had just joined the band. They made their first album with Perry called Infinity. So it
Right.
was an Infinity tour. And then we were playing right before them. And then opening act for us was Van Halen. So it was like 30 minutes of Van Halen, 45 minutes of Ronnie Montrose, and then like whatever, 90 minutes or 70 minutes of Journey. And that
Interesting.
was a tour that went across the country in a lot of ways playing the same venues I had just played with Jean-Luc Ponty, like 2,500 seat
Okay.
theaters, because Journey was just sort of getting started.
Hmm.
And during that time, they heard me play, and at the end of the tour, asked me to if I would want to join their band.
Okay. So you were on the okay with Montrose. They heard you, and then oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then it was
and that was another, and it was like again, not like they were this huge band, but it was interesting, and I had not worked with a singer.
right. Oh, okay. That's good.
I
Yeah.
mainly, I mean, yeah, like you play weddings and the
Yeah.
sax player sings the tune or whatever, like, and I'd played a little bit with singers in Boston, but working with Steve Perry, working with like an amazing singer, I had never done anything like that, and so that seemed very interesting to me, and to discipline my playing to be able to play pop tunes.
Right.
It was like a challenge and a new idea to go in that direction. So musically, it appealed to me, and moved to San Francisco sounded interesting. And I just moved to LA, only lived there about 8 months, and then ended up moving to the Bay Area, and I stayed there for 28 years. So that turned into a pretty nice move.
Yeah, yeah. So were you able to like that's a totally different discipline playing I would imagine pretty much the same set every night and you have this jazz background and these chops that are you have to be cautious of not overusing, I guess. Did it ever feel stagnant to you or did you just in the moment and doing your thing?
Well, the first step is it's just to figure out how to play a style of drumming that worked with those musicians
Hmm.
writing that tune. So that challenge is very interesting. So it wasn't like I was trying to make the gig something that it wasn't.
Right.
The main challenge and the main learning was, how do I be a good pop rock drummer?
Hmm.
So it was like an assignment, so I'd listen to Ringo and Charlie Watts and John Bonham and
Good.
Nigel Olsson with Elton John and just, and then work with those musicians and try to come up with drum parts. So the idea was essentially going from being more like an improvising musician to a musician that was compositional, a compositional approach to drumming.
Yeah.
How do I write a drum part that really makes this tune work? So I wasn't frustrated by that. It was, it was interesting enough in its own right to keep my attention.
Yeah.
But what I did miss was interacting with jazz musicians
Right.
personally.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
So while I was living in the Bay Area, I knew some musicians like a guitarist that played with Jean-Luc, though I didn't play with him, but I met him. Yeah, Joaquin Lievino is his name, and he introduced me to Randy Jackson, who was a bass player that played with Billy Cobham, and later and Jean-Luc, and I started hanging out with Randy, and then he introduced me to Tom Coster, who had played with Santana for many years, and
Sure.
Tom was a great jazz musician. And so we started a group with the four of us. And Tom got a deal on Fantasy Records. And so we made two albums for Fantasy, the Tom Coster group. And we played some gigs around the Bay Area. And then eventually, then, like I told you, the whole Vital Information story, by 83, I was doing that. So I had a balance
Right.
between playing with the rock musicians and then playing with the jazz musicians. And then eventually, the longer I lived there, I met more local
Hmm.
jazz musicians. I was playing like with Mel Martin
I know
and
that. Yeah.
Mel Graves, very good acoustic bass player, and Michael Zilber, saxophone player. So, so it turned into like becoming part of the, somewhat part of the jazz community in San Francisco, yet also being part of the rock community and session world out there. So like there was this whole world that happened that was alive and well out in the Bay Area.
Yeah. It seems like a bit of a balancing act, but that's really
Yeah,
cool that you're able to keep your foot more than just your foot, but still be a part of, your roots and the jazz playing for.
right. Because
Yeah.
it was very important to me to play jazz, improvised music, and to hang out with jazz musicians. It's a very different experience
Sure.
than than which I learned through my years of playing with Ronnie Montrose and Journey. That the focus of what they are interested in is pretty different. The
Hmm.
jazz musician
Yeah, yeah.
uh,
Right.
um, idea is quite different than trying to write pop tunes and then have hits on the radio. You
Yeah.
don't hear that too much hanging
No.
out with jazz musicians.
But you do notice, like when you do talk to a lot of rock musicians, and I get to a lot, they are listening to a lot of them are fascinated by jazz, even if they never went to jazz world, and they listen to a lot of jazz, and that's kind
That's
of
true.
cool, you know.
Some of them do.
It's, yeah, the open-minded one.
Right, right.
Steve, I've kept you a long time, and let me just ask you. I'm gonna button this up because you've been
Yep.
very generous. What's for the future? What do you got going on? Are you touring right now? Where can people see you?
I will be doing touring in 2026 with Vital Information.
Okay.
We have recorded about half of a new album that I don't know if I'll release it in 2026 because we're going to continue to play the music from new perspective and probably introduce a few new tunes and arrangements as we go. Um, but our main idea of 2026 is we're going to be in Tokyo. We're playing like the Cotton Club and the Blue Note. We're
Hmm.
going to England to play Ronnie Scott's. Then we're going to China to tour over in China. So mainly overseas. And maybe like we'll check out see about Birdland and
Hmm.
LA. Like, we're not going to do, in the last few years, we've done a lot of driving tours in the US. We've decided we're not going to do that this
Yeah,
year.
had enough of
Take
that.
a break from that and do some more like international tours. And, uh, and then I do have like about 3 weeks of gigs at Birdland about a year from now, like September, October. I tend to do these sort of a residency. I'll be playing with uh, a group called Coltrane Revisited, and then a tribute to Monk and a tribute to Bud Powell. I'll be doing those 3 weeks at Birdland next 2026.
Okay, so I'll have to hang around for that
Those are already booked, so
one. All right, cool. Well, I'm sure I'll come out to one of those and meet you in person, I hope, at some
sounds
point.
good.
Yeah,
All
that's
right.
great, man. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Steve, for all the music and the time and the whole thing, man.
My pleasure, Jay. Thanks for talking and much appreciated.